welcome back. This is Nathan Quinn, and this is part 2 of episode 4, covering the rebrand and the power of words. Preface this episode with every other episode's same preface, that I'm not a medical professional, nor am I a medical provider. Just a dude sharing his story and his experience. So, last episode we ended with having some grace for yourself, being okay, not being okay. And discussing that, shame is one of the biggest challenges, I think. And so how do we mitigate that shame? How do we remove that roadblock, that emotional response, because shame is an emotion? How do we remove that, understanding that people cannot control our emotional responses? And the answer was pick something that doesn't elicit that emotional response. Just change the name. So, why cognitive health? And I'll tell you why. Glad you asked, because I knew you were asking. So, Merriam-Webster defines cognitive as, quote, relating to being or involving conscious intellectual activity, such as thinking, reasoning, or remembering. So we're going to take that a step further. The same source then defines cognitive psychology as, quote, a branch of psychology concerned with mental processes as perception, thinking, learning, and memory, especially with respect to the internal events occurring between sensory stimulation and the overt expression of behavior. The International Classification of External Causes of Injuries defines injury, I'm combining cognitive injury as a suspected bodily lesion resulting from acute overexposure to energy, mechanical, thermal, electrical, chemical, or radiant, interacting with the body in amounts or at rates that exceed the threshold of physiological tolerance. Surprisingly, my search results for searching for an illness did not provide nearly as many options. And so maybe this is one of the challenges, right, with the term of mental illness, is not having a clear and concise shared definition of what an illness is. And so using these definitions to generate a basis of understanding, I think that cognitive health is an appropriate way to describe it, not least of which because it doesn't elicit that emotional response, but also because we now know, and I'll get into this in a couple episodes, but there is a physiological component to depression. They have done CAT scans or CT scans, some sort of medical scan, where they have compared a depressed brain and a non-depressed brain, and there is a visible difference. And so that implies, like, okay, hey, it's not just something that's fictitious or, untouchable or unmeasurable. Like, oh no, there's a chemical imbalance now that we can determine and we can identify. That's part of why they prescribe certain medications they prescribe, but it is something that is measurable. That said, it doesn't make treating it any easier. It's not like treating any other sort of injury where, like, okay, hey, there's a prescription amount of, you do this many reps, this many sets for this long, you'll be good. It doesn't work that way. I am here to report, unfortunately, no dice. So to me, a cognitive injury, I've got it written down here, could be defined as trauma to conscious intellectual activity and mental processes from overexposure to stimulus in amounts or rates that exceed the threshold of psychological tolerance. And I think that's important because I look at it, again, one of the ways I looked at it was a cognitive immune system, right? I have a stress fracture in my cognitive immune system. Each of us, right, has a unique load that I think we can tolerate on our cognitive immune system. And at a certain point, if you overload that, like anything else, if you overload your muscular skeletal structure, my medic's going to kill me. Your bones and your muscles, your bones crack, they break, your muscles tear, they rip, they strain. Your cognitive immune system, I submit, does the same thing. And that's how you get anxiety, that's how you get depression and other challenges. So I think using cognitive health and cognitive injuries in lieu of mental health and behavioral health, one, is still an appropriate way to look at it, but two, it also, and more importantly, reduces and removes that shame. I don't have to worry about people trying to control their emotions because I'm not calling it something that should elicit that same negative response. And like rebrands happen all the time, right? You look at, NFL teams rebrand themselves all the time. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. The Washington Redskins went to the Washington football team, went to the Washington Commanders, and the Cleveland Indians went to the Cleveland Guardians. You see my point here. It happens. Sometimes it's effective, sometimes it's not. Twitter became X. Gold Star Chili became Gold Star. They're still the same entity. They're still the same organization. We've just changed the name to, I think, change the perception or change the emotional response when you look at that organization or you look at that product, right? It's the same thing, though. We're just trying to change people's perception. And so I think a rebrand is the same thing. And so changing the verbiage from, mental health problems to cognitive health injuries achieves the same thing. All right. So I'm going to just say it out loud with me, right? Say cognitive health and then say mental health and then say behavioral health. And I would imagine that the first one is probably the one that elicited the least amount of any sort of emotional response. Could be wrong, but I'd be curious to know in your comments in the video below, hey, is that true for the viewers here? Like, did cognitive health and cognitive injuries elicit a much less negative emotional response than, say, mental health or behavioral health? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to actually. This is my theory. Again, I'm not a professional, so I have a subject sample of like one, but that's my theory, and I'd be curious to know if there is some truth to that. And so, all right, so why are we looking at the rebrand, right? What's the point of all this? And I think the point is that it highlights the power of words and how word choice influences our individual perception. I did not fully appreciate this in my journey until a couple months in, right? Now you might say, it's pretty obvious words have meaning. Correct. But it is a direct correlation to our perspective. So I'm going to use one of my examples. One of the methods I tried when I first started going through, I wanted to categorize my days, right? I was a very data-driven guy. I was frustrated by the lack of objective metrics that you could use to measure improvement, right? It's not, again, like going back to a broken leg when you're doing therapy, how many sets can you do of a particular exercise? Do you have the strength to do the more challenging version of the exercise? There are metrics that you can use to measure your improvement. Well, with depression, there aren't really. It is measurable, but it is very challenging to measure your improvement. So I was trying to come up with a way to do that, right? Because I'm a data-driven dude. Like I need to see it. I need to see that this is working. And so I started categorizing my days. And so I created a little spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet each day, right? And I would categorize them as good days or bad days. And I wanted it to be as objective as possible, not realizing that cognitive health treatment is so subjective because we're each so different. Each depends on the person, depends on their cognitive immune system, depends on the severity of the injury. All those things make it, there's not a one-size-fits-all equation for treatment. And it's important to understand that and to be okay with that and to accept that and understand, like, hey, that's doable. It's still doable. even though it's not one size fits all. There's no, well, the textbook says this. Like, nah, not really, dude. But that's okay. It's still doable. But I didn't realize this, or I refused to accept it, right? So I needed these data points. And so I kept a log, and I would annotate each. I would try to do it at the end of the day. I wouldn't judge the day until I was at the close of the day. And so, when my wife or my therapist would ask me how my day was going, I would say it was a good day or a bad day, right? And this is important because it highlighted two unconscious biases. The first one was that I was still applying a moral judgment, right? The day is good or the day is bad. Another way of saying that would be the day is right or the day is wrong. Okay, well, I was still conditioning myself to look at saying, okay, hey, if I got a lot of depression or a lot of anxiety or a lot of intrusive thoughts today, that's a bad day. That's wrong. i.e., depression, intrusive thoughts, anxiety are bad. Not the case. Desirable? No. Bad? Also no. But because I was categorizing those days as bad, I was subconsciously, from my perspective, looking at those things and therefore those days as bad. So I started looking for ways to change my mindset because, that's probably not super helpful. So I still wanted to find ways to categorize my days. I was like, okay, well, all right, I still need data points, but it would probably be more helpful to get away from good and bad, right or wrong. So I'm going to go with easy instead of good, and I'm going to go with hard instead of bad, right? Was it an easy day where I didn't really have to work very hard, or was it a hard day where I had to do a lot of hard work and it was just tough? Excuse me. And I felt that easy and hard were good ways to describe how the day felt without attaching that moral judgment to it, right? So a hard or rough day was where I had to do a lot of work due to intrusive thoughts, depression, or anxiety, right? Easy day was usually a lack thereof. No work at all. Just felt like a regular day. The second unconscious bias was that looking at things from good or bad meant that I was either happy or sad. And it's a very Western way of thinking, right? If I'm not happy, I must be sad. Or if I'm not sad, I must be happy. The absence of happiness is not necessarily sadness. Vice versa, the absence of sadness is not necessarily happiness. There is a middle ground. You can just be. And that's not good or bad. And so, that was one of the challenges I felt, was because I was going through depression and I was stuck in that Western mindset, was that, I was like, man, I just want to be happy again. Like I don't, things that normally bring me joy do not bring me joy. I'm not happy. Like, hey, I wasn't shooting at the time because I didn't have access to my gun. So like going competitively shooting would make me happy. Not so much, right? Seeing my wife, hanging out with my friends, all those things like should, in theory, make me happy, but they weren't. And so I was like, man, I just want to be happy again. Why am I not happy? And then one day I was talking with my therapist and we were like, were you ever really happy all the time? Like even before all this, like looking back at life, were you just always happy? Because that would just, there might be a clinical diagnosis for that if you're just constantly euphoric. And I was like, well, no, there were plenty of times in life where I just wasn't happy. He's like, okay, in those times, were you sad? Like, well, no, not necessarily. Okay. Well, if you weren't happy and you weren't sad, what were you? Like, I just was. Light bulb moment. Okay, so maybe you can be happy, sad, or neutral. And, again, understanding and appreciating that the absence of happiness is not sadness necessarily, nor is the absence of sadness happiness. It's just it just is what it is. It's the abs. You're just not sad or you're not happy. Doesn't mean you're the other one. It's not binary. There can be a neutral ground. And so I was like, okay, just as things can be, moral and immoral, they can be amoral. And I think recognizing that during my day catalog was critical, because it's like, hey, I can be happy, I can be sad, or I can just be neutral. There can be okay days where I'm not happy, I'm not sad, I just am. And so, okay, cool. That was, I think, a more effective way to catalog those days. And so it allowed me to see that there were neutral days just as many times as there were hard days or easy days. And then, from that, I even began to expand it to where there was, giving myself more wiggle room. There was hard, marginally hard, neutral, marginally easy, easy. And so I think initially the log was helpful, right? It did provide me those data points to kind of refute my emotions, because one of the things that happens is when you enter that depressed state, or the depression hits, right? You feel like it's been this way forever, even though it's not, and it hasn't been, right? More likely than not, but it does not feel that way. It feels like you've always been depressed and you always will be depressed. And that can lead to a feeling of hopelessness, because it feels like it's been forever since I felt normal, and it feels like I'm never going to get out of this. But what that log allowed me to do was to look back and go, okay, hey, I know I feel like, if what is today? Friday. I know I feel like I'm depressed today, and I feel like I've been depressed for a week or 2 weeks or a month, right? But I can look back at this data log and go, no, okay, this is only the first or second day. And actually, before that, I had a run of a couple easy days or neutral days. Now so it was helpful, but the problem became that, and my therapist tried to help me with this, but I didn't appreciate that, was that, by doing this, by keeping this log, I was establishing an expectation, or a desire rather, that for me, success was more easy and neutral days than hard days, right? Was the end state. Knowing that I don't really have the control over that, right? Like, the more you try to influence that, the less likely that's going to be. Because, and this is, I think, what my therapist was getting at, by the very action of keeping that log and logging those days, I was giving my injuries the energy, right? I was focusing on them. I was putting them on a pedestal, because I was so fixated on what type of day it is, and not concerned, but worried about, or trying to get to, fewer hard days, more happy and neutral days, that at a certain point, it became counterproductive, right? Like, initially, yes, it was beneficial, where it allowed me to see, okay, yep, objectively, I haven't been feeling depressed for months or weeks or days, right? It's only been a day or two. Okay. It was useful then. But at a certain point, I achieved a level of equilibrium, but I plateaued, because I continued to keep track of the days, where it was no longer providing that benefit, but now I was continuing to focus on it. And so he was like, hey man, I really think you should try. Like, let's go a week without keeping this log. And I was like, okay, all right, fine. And so we did. And I think that's when I realized that, hey, the the concept of having a hard day or an easy day or a neutral day really wasn't anything new. The reality was that life's always been that way, right? We've all woken up and been like, man, today just sucks, right? For one reason or another, like, I don't know what it is, but today sucks. The adage is woke up on the wrong side of the bed. And a lot of times you don't know why. Sometimes you do. I slept like crap. I'm sick, whatever. And then some days you wake up and you're not happy or sad. You're just kind of there, right? And so the revelation to me was like, that's always been a part of my and the human experience. I am just now so much more acutely aware of it because I'm focusing on it. I am hyper focused on what kind of day I'm having, i.e. what I'm feeling emotionally or not, that I made it this massive deal. It's like, well, it's always the way it's been. And I didn't realize that until I stopped keeping track. And the days were what they were. Hey, if it's a hard day, it's a hard day. If it's an easy day, it's an easy day. If it's neutral day, it's neutral day. It is what it is. Days are days. Don't worry about it. You can't really control it, right? You control what you can in life, but you don't worry about the rest. And so I think what my therapist was trying to get me to realize was, hey man, at a certain point, you got to let go. Because I think by me keeping track of that log, I was still trying to maintain control to a degree over something that I ultimately could not control. And I think that subconsciously was generating a bit of anxiety with me. And that's hard. Recognizing what you can control and what you can't and letting go of the stuff that you can't. I still struggle with that. 100%. I'm driven up a wall when things that I can't control don't go the way that I want them to go. And I'm probably not the only person. But, I hope that this has been helpful in highlighting, right, the power of word choice. Using hard over bad, using easy over good, being aware of how our word choice attaches morality to the injury, and is that really fair? An injury isn't moral, right? I think it's important to realize though that this conversation isn't going to happen quickly, and that these changes aren't going to occur instantaneously. It's only going to happen through repetition and spreading the conversation and talking to other people about it and advocating for it. And that's where I think a lot of you all come in and helping share this message and have these conversations with other people that are experiencing similar issues, similar injuries. I think the more I used certain words or told myself certain narratives, the more I came to believe them, if that makes sense. And so a lot of it takes time and reps. So that is, that wraps up episode 4, Power of Words and Narratives. Appreciate you guys listening. Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Let me know if you think there's value, or let me know if there's other ideas. Like it's something maybe I haven't considered. Again, I'm not, this isn't like a me thing. This isn't mine. This is for everybody. So if you have an idea, share it in the comments, and maybe I can talk about it the next episode. But I'll see you guys the next episode. Until that time, I'll see you.